Imagine it. The year is 1797. The United States has just inaugurated its second president, and yet there's already international drama. Here we were at the tail end of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon. In a way, the French were fighting against monarchy the same way that the US was recently. So you would think that the United States would have some sympathy toward the revolutionaries, but that wasn't the case. John Adams viewed the revolutionaries as tyrannical, despite initial support. At this point in time, the French Revolution had been going on for so long that France was pretty much in arms with all of Europe. During the French Revolution, George Washington, who was president, decided to declare the United States as neutral. But there's only so long you can stay neutral when both England and France keep poking at you. So, in 1795, they created the Jay Treaty, which was an agreement between the UK and the US to stop fighting. Let's just say that France was not a fan of that. France used its navy to continue getting in the way of the United States and its trade relations with the UK. So much so that ships were being confiscated even in the Caribbean. So now it's time to do something. So the new president, John Adams, decided to call a special session of Congress to discuss this ongoing problem. Federalists like him wanted to build our defenses, but not encourage any conflict. The Democratic Republicans, such as Vice President Thomas Jefferson, were more in support of the revolutionaries. The perspective was Federalists, like John Adams, were pro-monarchy, despite what the U.S. fought for in its own revolution. In an extreme point of view, like Jefferson's, they kind of saw Federalists as almost like anti-American. In an effort to make progress, John Adams put together an envoy to go to France and create a peace treaty similar to the Jay Treaty. The two men on the right were Federalists and distrusted the French, and Gary on the left was a little bit more flexible. When the men arrived in France, they met with the French Foreign Minister Talleyrand, and he initially had a brief meeting with them, then another meeting with them a week later to say that they wanted to be given an explanation for a speech that the president, Adams, back in America had made that had offended some French people of note. The envoy decided not to address it. While the American Commission waited to meet with the foreign minister again, a few other men came into their lives and started having informal negotiations. And part of that first set of negotiations was to let them know that in order to have more formal negotiations with the foreign minister, they were going to have to cough up some money. For one, they needed to loan the French government a substantial amount of money. For two, they needed to give Talleyrand, specifically the foreign minister, $50,000, a bribe, which today would be like $125 million. Needless to say that even though this was considered common practice for the time, the Americans were quite offended by it. Even so, these men came together and said, okay, look, we'll pretend to entertain these wild numbers that you're giving us if you will back off of our ships while we have these negotiations. To which France responded with none. After the Americans refused to give in to this money demand, Talleyrand basically stopped meeting with them and would only send these guys, the informal negotiators, to have any communication. Although behind the scenes, Talleyrand was trying to divide the men in hopes of personal gain. Let's just say, after 5 months in France, things had gotten a bit messy. So Talleyrand here says, you know what? I back off about giving the France a loan. How about that? But now, Pinckney and Marshall here had been completely iced out of negotiations. So they left and Gary was the only one here to deal with anything. So Talleyrand tells Gary, if you leave, I'm declaring war on the United States. So, in a moment of frustration, Gary decides he's getting in touch with the president because now he doesn't want to negotiate with Talleyrand either. So now everything's blowing up. He ended up staying in France for a total of a year before he was allowed to go home. While the men were away, President used this opportunity to build the army in case the envoy turned out to be a failure. And when it was clear it was going to be a failure, uh, many decided they wanted to just declare war on France. Thomas Jefferson used this as an opportunity to criticize the president and to say that he's just over dramatizing what's going on in France and that he really just wanted a war against the revolutionaries in the first place. He demanded that Adams release the dispatches from the commissioners while they were in France. This is when the informal negotiators' names were replaced with the letters X, Y, and Z, therefore creating the XYZ Affair. This actually backfired on Jefferson because when the dispatches were released, it turned out that what was going on in France was much worse than Adams had ever shared, because Adams was afraid that this was what would happen, that they would create a war over it, because he never told anyone that they had asked for a bribe either. And that was the start of the Quasi War, which was the naval battle between the US and France, mainly in the Caribbean. The backfire reached all the way across the ocean back to Talleyrand, where he was put on the spot for his actions, where he denied any association with the informal negotiators. Now, depending on who you are, it may be fortunate or unfortunate, but at this point, Napoleon has dissolved the whole commission in France where Talleyrand was directing from, and so he was no longer a person of interest or foreign minister. A new set of negotiators, actually led by former negotiator Marshall, was sent back to France, now under this new regime, and were able to accomplish what they couldn't before and made a peace treaty called the Commission of 1800. For more information about the presidency of John Adams, feel free to check back through my presidential series on the episode dedicated to his tenure.